Well, hey, good evening, everybody. Nice to be with you. My name is Howard Olsen. I'm here in Vancouver, and I see that we've got a great crowd tonight from all corners of the planet. I see some of our friends from Australia have made it, and I see all corners of North America. So to all of you, I wish you a good evening or perhaps even a good morning, depending on where it might be that you're dialed in from. Anyway, I've got a great presentation lined up for you here, and actually what I believe to be a very urgent presentation. Let me ask you a question. If I were to say to you that all is well with the world, how would you respond to that? Would you agree with me, or would you think I'm nuts that all is not well with the world? I mean, I don't think we need to look very far, and we feel these undercurrents of trouble. And you know, the grip of 2007, 2008 has never really quite left us. Well, tonight I want to make sense of all of this. I want to take all these things that are going on in the world and kind of make sense of them. Take these complicated issues. Of course, we got an hour together, so I can't dive into all of it, but I'm going to give you a high-level overview of what's really going on, and then use that as a contrast to share with you why I believe that gold is so very important, particularly at this moment in time. So why gold, why now, and why this thing called Karatbars? But more importantly, I'm going to share with you what I honestly believe is the most powerful financial literacy program in existence today. And I'm going to show you how you can actually get paid in both cash and gold for showing others a better way to save. So it's really a brilliant thing. We're going to show you how to take some of your existing spending habits, turn them into savings habits, and then get paid in both cash and gold for just simply sharing that forward. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. I want to take you back to school real quick. And remember grade school? Remember grade 1, 2, 3, and learning the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic? Remember them? All right, so we learned the 3 R's. My question for you is, who taught you about money? And if you're like most people in the live audiences, live presentations that I make, you're probably going, well, no one taught me about money. Actually, not entirely true. I want you to remember graduating from high school, and then you were presented with your credit card application, and I just see some things going on in the chat room. I'm just going to check this real quick, and I'm going to be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So just if you got questions, I want you to write them down, save to the end, and then we're going to open up the lines, and we'll have an opportunity for all of that. Hey, Joby Gay, good to see you here. Nice to have you. Anyway, but remember, listen, I want to take you, so you got your first credit card, right? Okay, you graduated from high school, maybe on the cusp of your first job, you got a credit card, and then you learned how to get a credit limit increase, right? So that was pretty good. You were told how that would be good for your credit rating, and so you got your credit limit increase, and then you got your first student loan, and then we got a car loan. And then, you know, maybe we graduated from university or college or whatever that might happen to be, and we got our first real job, and then we learned how to get a mortgage. And then we learned how to maybe get a business loan, and then we learned how to actually borrow money to put into our retirement savings accounts. Listen, think about this. Our entire lives, we have been taught about money by the private for-profit corporations called banks that have a vested interest in selling us their debt instruments, which are their for-profit products. Now, I want you to hang on to that word debt, because that word debt is going to be pervasive through this there's a common theme here, and you're going to see it over and over and over again. I want to ask you another question. All right? When you think about most North Americans or Australians, Canadians, Americans, in a really general sense, when you think of the average person, do you think they have a plan to get themselves out of debt and have the ability to retire in the next 3 to 5 years? What do you think? You're probably shaking your head going, no, I don't think they do. Well, let me ask you another question. Do you? And even if you do, how is that plan actually working for you? You see, I've asked that question tens of thousands of times in the last decade, and the answer that typically comes back is probably very similar to what you're thinking right now. You know, and so if this is true for you or somebody you know, I want to share with you why that is, why there's no shame in it, how it's actually kind of not your fault, how we got here, but more importantly, what we can do about it. Because, folks, numbers don't lie. They'll always tell us the truth as long as we look at the right numbers, non-doctored numbers. So I took a snapshot of, you know, typical things going into a typical home in a typical week, you know, milk, bread, eggs, beef, chicken, fish, that kind of stuff. Took a snapshot, looked at it over 20 years, 15 years, 10 years. You know what we discovered? A loaf of bread has gone up 959%. Movie tickets are up 483%. Housing is back to, you know, pre-2008 levels at 1,100% in many markets. Here in Vancouver, we're up 35% just on the year. Okay, postage stamps. Now that's a small spend, but it's 800% increase, and 800% is 800%. And milk has gone up 257%. So let me ask you this. Have you seen a 250 to 1,000% increase in the wages that you can bring home in the past decade? I don't think so. I sure haven't. And when I ask that question live, no matter who I ask, everybody goes, nope, not me. Well, and that's exactly the problem. You see, the government keeps telling us that inflation's in check, that we actually don't have any inflation. And now we can see that that's a load of bunk, because when we look at the real numbers, okay, inflation is very real, and this is why so many people are finding it so difficult to get themselves out of debt, living paycheck to paycheck, can't create any real meaningful savings or prepare for their retirements, because the inflation numbers are really pervasive when we look at the right stuff. All right? And you know, listen, this is not just anecdotal evidence. I can actually go right into the government's own statistics, and even using their manipulated statistics can show you that numbers are in decline. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, our wages have been in decline since 1970. In fact, wages, when inflation adjusted, basically peaked in 1970. What happened in 1971? We went off the gold standard. We started firing up the printing press, and we printed and printed and printed. And since 71, our wages, inflation adjusted, have been in serious decline. In fact, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we've lost $2,100 only since Obama took office in 2009, and $3,600 since Bush took office in 2007. All right, and this is using the government's statistics. Now, we just looked at some real numbers, and we know the numbers are much higher than the official postings. All right, this is the problem. Inflation is pervasive. It's everywhere. Now, I want to talk about this thing called inflation for just a minute, okay? Because inflation, most people believe, is an increase in the price of goods. And I would like to propose to you that inflation is not an increase in the price of goods. It's a decrease in purchasing power of our currency, because the more they print, the less it's worth. And so the more they print, the less it's worth. It buys you less, which is why the price rises. But when we measure goods in a real form of money, in a stable store of value, the prices remain constant over long periods of time. I want to use a man's suit here, okay? Not because there's a gender bias, but simply because we can track it over 2,000 years. Now, I can go into any biblical or historical text, and I know the suit of the day 2,000 years ago was actually a fine toga, a fine robe, okay? A toga and a robe, a handcrafted leather belt, and a pair of nice leather sandals. And you know what the price of that outfit was? It was 1 ounce of gold. You wanted that complete outfit? It was an ounce of gold, 1 gold coin. Now, fast forward up to 1960. They're not wearing togas anymore. Now we're into suits and ties, so a blazer and a pair of slacks, a shirt, a tie, a handcrafted leather belt, and a pair of nice leather shoes. Do you know what the price of gold in 1960 was? I do. It was $35. And you know what the price of that outfit was in 1960? $35. Now, what's it look like today? Today, if you go into a fine men's shop and you want to get yourself a complete suit, a full jacket, pair of slacks, a nice shirt, silk tie, a handcrafted leather belt, and a pair of nice leather shoes, what would the price of that entire outfit be? Do you know what the price of gold is today? Well, it's been hovering between $1,200 and $1,300. Let's cut it up the middle, call it $1,250. You know what the price of that outfit would be today? Roughly $1,250. 1 ounce of gold, 1 gold coin. And what I'd like to propose to you is that the price of that outfit hasn't changed one bit in 2,000 years. It was a gold coin 2,000 years ago. It was an ounce of gold 60 years ago. And it's still a gold coin today. The only thing that has changed is the value of our currency, because they keep printing it and printing it and printing it. And the more they print, the less it's worth. And so now it takes more of these declining paper things to get milk, bread, and eggs than it did a decade ago. It takes more of these declining paper units to go get a suit than it did a decade ago. And it takes more of these declining paper items to go get an ounce of gold than it did a decade ago. But when we price it in gold, which is real money, that's got a 5,000-year track record as money, the price actually remains completely fixed, because gold cannot be printed, manipulated, debased, or otherwise destroyed, okay? That's the truth. The problem that we have today is we deal with what's called a fiat currency. Fiat currency is literally money which is printed out of thin air, backed by absolutely nothing. And even today, more importantly, it's created with the click of a mouse or the stroke of a keyboard. It cost the bank that made it absolutely nothing to create it, and then they loan it back to us. I'm going to show you in a moment how money gets made today, all right? But that's the problem. It's actually unbacked currency that has zero value behind it. Now, this is a great quote. This is from William Lyon Mackenzie King. He was Canada's Prime Minister in 1934, the year the Bank of Canada, Canada's central bank, opened its doors. Okay? So this quote applies to all of us, no matter where in the world you're dialed in from. Here's what he said. Once a nation gives up control of its currency, okay, hang on to that. Once a nation gives up control of its currency, it matters not who makes the laws, because usury, once in control, will wreak havoc on any nation. Usury simply means loaning money for interest. Once a nation gives up control of its currency. Well, when did it happen? For Canada, it happened in 1974 when we joined the G8. And for the United States, it happened in 1913 with the opening of the Federal Reserve. Now, you see, most people think the Federal Reserve is actually a government institution. It's not. The only thing federal about the Federal Reserve is the first word in its name. It's actually a private bank headquartered in Puerto Rico. Now get this, it's not even headquartered in the United States. It doesn't even reside in the United States. It is a private bank owned by a handful of private shareholders. It's headquartered and domiciled in Puerto Rico. And so, yes, there's the Fed of New York and the Fed of Chicago and the Fed of Texas and the Fed of San Francisco. Those are branch offices of a private bank that's offshore. Here's what I want you to get. The Federal Reserve private bank opened its doors in 1913 and took control of the U.S. and through it the global economic system. What I want you to see here is they started printing these things called Federal Reserve notes, okay? In 1913, a dollar was worth a dollar. It had 100% of its purchasing power. I want to take you down here to 1944. Just follow down this slide with me, okay? 1944 is significant because, you know, World War II was coming to an end. The global trade was up on the rise. Exchange rates were wildly fluctuating. Nations were decimated through the war, so they needed a mechanism to stabilize global trade. So they came up with a system called Bretton Woods. And under the Bretton Woods Accord, the United States would become the brand new reserve currency. It would be backed by gold. So in other words, the United States had the gold, United States was the reserve currency, and all other nations would peg their currency to the US dollar, and in effect, all currencies were on the gold standard using the US dollar as the currency. Okay, you got it? So everybody's on a global standard now. This system worked really well for a number of years. But here's what happened. We just keep going down this chart here, and we get to 1971. The years leading up to that, you know, the late 60s, Vietnam War, hugely costly war. The United States went heavily into debt on the Vietnam War effort, and were unable to pay these war bills. And the only way to pay the bill was basically to fire up the printing press to print more currency. Now, here's the problem. When you have a gold-backed currency, you cannot just fire up the printing press and print more money at will, because every note in circulation represents an equal proportion of gold in the vault. And so if you want to print more money, you need to inject more gold into the vault. Well, the U.S. didn't have any more gold, and the minute they started firing up the printing press, all the world said, hey, we don't want your U.S. dollars anymore, give us the gold. So in 1971, Nixon says, we're closing the gold window, and we're taking the United States off the gold standard. What this did was give them the ability to fire up the printing press with no value behind it. But remember, Bretton Woods is still in play, and everybody was pegged to the U.S. So when Nixon took the United States off the gold standard, he pulled the entire world off the gold standard, and they've been printing and printing and printing and printing worthless, unbacked fiat currency ever since. 1971 was the year the world went on to a fiat currency system, okay? It's huge. Now, this chart gives us a perfect 100-year snapshot of the U.S. dollar, and from 1913 to 2013, the dollar had lost 95% of its purchasing power, or in other words, a dollar got you a dollar's worth of stuff in 1913. By the time you get to 2013, a dollar only gets you 5 cents worth of stuff, okay? We're in 2016 now. We've actually lost 99% of our purchasing power, but I'm going to get into that. I'm going to show you this in just a second. This chart right here beautifully represents our increasing money supply. I want you to just look at this red line. Now, this chart starts in 65, but we could effectively go all the way out to the corner here. What this shows us is the history of the U.S. dollar and how it increased. Just follow this red line. I want you to notice how you got this really very gradual increase. And at about 1971, funny enough, the year that we went off the gold standard, you start to see this line begin to slope upward. The upward slope shows us the year-on-year increase in money, unbacked, okay, fiat currency. I just want you to know, we get here to 2008. 2008, okay, so you got this slow, steady increase until we hit 2008. What happened in 2008? Well, that's when we had the last major banking crisis, right? The subprime mortgages, the banks were over leveraged, the system was on the verge of collapse. In fact, many of them did collapse, and the government came along and then bailed out private banks using taxpayer dollars to do it. And then then the Federal Reserve started, this private bank fired up the printing press and started, QE1 and QE2, and then we heard of QE3. Many people are confused by that, don't really quite understand it. It's very simple. Quantitative easing, all it means is we're going to print more money. They just find a beautiful way to come up with a brand new term because the word print more money would be politically unpopular. QE, quantitative easing, all it means is we're going to print more money. Now, here's what I want you to watch. 2008, there's $825 billion worth of currency in circulation. We get here to 2016, from $825 billion, they've now increased the U.S. monetary supply to $4.7 trillion. They've quadrupled the amount of money. Okay, so in 8 years, they've quadrupled the amount that it took the original 200 years to create. If you want to know where the inflation is coming from, this is it. The more they print, the less it's worth, so it costs more to buy stuff. It's like a hidden tax. And it's not just the United States. I could take you through the charts of every G20 country, Canada, China, India, 2008 hits, boom, bang, kaboom. Lots of money being printed, and the whole world is printing brand new units of currency, whether it's pound sterling, European euro, Japanese yen, Australian dollar, US dollar, Canadian dollar. The whole world is printing excessive amounts of currency. And this is where our inflation is coming from. Now, I want to talk about this word inflation one more time. It's critical that you understand this. Okay, so inflation. We just said it's not an increase in the price, it's a reduction in your purchasing power. The word inflation is actually the noun form of the verb to inflate. So what does inflate mean? Well, here's Webster's definition. To increase something by a large or excessive amount. So what are some things that we can inflate? Well, we can inflate a bicycle tire, right? So you get out your pump, you pump, and you pump, and you pump. But if you give that tire one too many pumps, boom! Out goes the tire. It's finished. It's gone. It just blew up. Or we could take a birthday balloon and we can go. But if you give that balloon one too many breaths, bang! Goodbye, balloon. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's exactly what they're doing to our money. When they talk about inflation, they're talking about inflating, increasing the amount of currency. And the amount of currency that they increase, the less it's worth. That's what inflation is, and that's what's happening right before our eyes. And it's really simple to understand it once we understand some of these simple terms. That's what's going on here. Do you know that today the United States creates $1 trillion of brand new debt every single year? Okay? Debt every single year. That's $3 billion a day. Now, I want to explain to you how this works. You want to know how money gets printed? It's really simple. Now, I just finished telling you that the Federal Reserve is a private bank. It's not a government institution, okay? So basically, it's not the government. But the government does have a department. It's called the Treasury Department, which is a federal government institution. So here's what happens. The government says, we need more money. So they go to the Treasury Department, they say, issue a bunch of bonds. Now, we've heard of the bond market, and we've heard of the Treasury bill market, okay? Very simple. So here's what happens. The government issues bonds and T-bills, which are nothing more than promises to pay in the future with interest, okay? So what is it? It's a debt. The government issues a debt called a bond. They walk it across the street over to the Federal Reserve office. The Federal Reserve takes that debt, in other words, a note, which is a promise to pay backed by the taxpayer, your signature, my signature, and then the Federal Reserve prints this money from nothing and loans it over to the government with interest. In this scenario, every new dollar that gets created, every new yen, every new dollar, every new euro, every new unit of currency that gets created is a brand new dollar of debt. And we are choking ourselves on it. And that's what's happening here. Now, we throw these numbers around, okay? So we talk about hundreds of thousands and millions and billions and trillions, and we hear these numbers, but we don't really understand them, do we? So I want to help you understand these numbers, okay? I just want you to get a sense of how big the problem is. So if we could measure money in units of time, because we can all see time. We understand days and hours and seconds. So I want to put it in these perspectives, okay? If we could measure money in units of time, here's what it would look like. Now I want to play a little game with you because it's going to help you. It's going to help you, really help you see this. All right, so listen, I can't jump through the computer screen, so I can't do anything funny to you. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to just close your eyes. It'll really help you with this. It's a visualization, okay? Close your eyes. I want you to imagine $100,000. Can you see it? Most of us can see $100,000. It's maybe a bank balance or a mortgage payment or whatever it is, okay? Open your eyes. Clear the slate. Close your eyes again. $1 million. That's the next one. Can you see $1 million? Yep, most of us can see $1 million, 6 zeros. We see it. Open your eyes. Close them again. Can you see, what's the next one up from million? Billion. Can you see $1 billion? Getting a little more fuzzy, isn't it? Yep. Okay, open your eyes. What about $1 trillion? Can you see that? Gone. All right. Here's what it looks like. If we could measure money in units of time, here's what it looks like. 100,000 seconds is 1.1 days. So, and these are real numbers. You can calculate them yourself. 100,000 seconds equals 1 day. What's the next unit up from that? Okay, we go from 100,000 to 1 million, right? So 1 million seconds jumps from 1 day to 11 days. What's the next one up from that? It's 1 billion. 1 billion seconds jumps to 32 years. You starting to see when we talk about our money? What's the next one up from that? It's 1 trillion. You want to know what 1 trillion is? Look at this. From 1 billion to 1 trillion, we jump from 32 years to 32,000 years. Ladies and gentlemen, we're increasing the debt by $1 trillion every year. That's just in the United States. Europe is increasing their debt by $1 trillion every year. Japan is increasing their debt by $1 trillion every year. And we have a derivative market, which is now basically bad debt, that's sitting at $170 trillion. You could tax 100% of the entire world's population. Now, you could never do it, but theoretically speaking, if you taxed 100% of the people, 100% of their income, it wouldn't generate enough money to even pay the interest on that amount of debt. Ladies and gentlemen, we're sitting on a house of cards, and if time were money, bang, we are out of time. And Voltaire put it so beautifully when he said, paper, fiat, money will always return to its intrinsic value, which is zero. Ladies and gentlemen, we are sitting on the edge of a cliff that's about to implode itself, okay? It's important to understand this. The size of the problem today is 4 times bigger than it was in 2008 when we had the last crisis. What does that mean? It means that the next crisis is 4 times bigger. Actually, it's more than 4 times bigger. Now, this is not a doom and gloom presentation, okay? I think knowledge gives you power. I think, just like there is day and there is night, and there is hot and there is cold, and there is light and there is dark, there is crisis, there is opportunity, but we can't talk about the solution unless we first understand the problem, and that's what the front end of this presentation is all about. All right? Now, I want to share with you a couple other things. So let me ask you this. Have I made a case that inflation is a reduction in our purchasing power? Like, does inflation make sense to you? Okay? And we got a big problem. That the level of debt that we've created is completely unsustainable. Have I validated that? And that when this inflation comes in when we lose our purchasing power. All right. I want to talk about some other current events that are going on because I want you to see the big picture. Okay? So I want to talk about the petrodollar. I want to talk about what's going on with China and Russia. And I want to talk about these things called derivatives. So let's start with the petrodollar. Now, we've all heard of the petrodollar, haven't we? All right, so what is that? Well, here's what happened. 1971, Nixon takes the United States and the rest of the world off the gold standard, and all of a sudden, listen, under Bretton Woods, the whole world had to use U.S. dollars as the world's reserve currency. So I see some people raising their hand through this presentation. I'm just going to keep plowing through this until we get to the very end, and at the end, I will take questions, okay? So just hold your questions until we get to the end of this thing. All right, so in 1971, we go off the gold standard. Okay, demand for U.S. dollars begins to drop. The States is printing off these dollars, and there's no place for these dollars to go. So they need a new reserve currency system. So here's what they did. OPEC stands for the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And Henry Kissinger and Nixon and the whole trade delegation went to the OPEC nations, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Iran, Iraq, all of those guys, and basically said, here's what we want you to do. We want you to sell your oil to the rest. Now, these are the major exporters. We want you to sell your oil only in U.S. dollars. To which they replied, well, why would we do that? Well, in exchange for you selling oil only in U.S. dollars, We'll provide you with military cover. We'll put bases into your countries. We'll protect your oil fields so there'd be no cost, no military spend on your parts. We'll protect you. Good deal for the country. So they said, okay, we'll go along. And under which the petrodollar and OPEC was born. Now, here's what it looks like. Okay? Under the petrodollar system, every nation had to buy its oil in U.S. dollars, but they all got their own currencies. All right. Now, the United States is not the only country that buys oil. Everybody buys oil, and the whole world was under massive development. Okay. So here's how it works. So China and Russia and India and Australia and Japan, anybody who needs oil had to take their currency and convert it for U.S. dollars so they could use those U.S. dollars to buy oil. What this did was, so as global demand for oil increased, it also increased global demand for U.S. dollars, which meant that as the Federal Reserve fired up their printing press and printed and printed and printed and printed and printed and printed and printed, the United States was able to export their inflation to nations around the world. You follow me so far? All right. This enabled the United States to maintain a pretty high standard of living because normally when you print that amount of money, you'd get hyperinflation. You blow out your cost of living. But they were able to take that inflation, export it to other countries, and keep a relatively good cost of living at home. But here's what's going on now. All right. Now, first of all, I showed you how all this money printing has reduced the purchasing power. And there's a lot of bad loans sitting out there, okay? The second thing that's going on now, the globe is in a recession, so the global demand for oil is falling, which is reducing global demand for U.S. dollars. We've also seen the price of oil fall from $100 a barrel to $40 a barrel, which also reduces the amount of these dollars that have to get exported around the globe. And the next thing that's happening is that the OPEC nations have said, you've printed way too many of these dollars. They're not worth anything anymore. They're all walking away from the petrodollar system. And just because you're not hearing it on CNBC or NBC or CBC or CNN doesn't mean it's not happening. And the entire petrodollar system is now beginning to fall apart. And all those OPEC nations and Syria and Iran and Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Kuwait, they're selling their petroleum in non-US dollars. What does that mean? It means that they don't need the US dollars anymore that they're sitting on. So if you don't need them anymore, what happens to them? Well, they got to go back to the place they were created. In other words, they're coming home. And when that happens, and all of those dollars come back on shore, we're going to see massive increases in pricing because there's going to be a flood of inflation to hit the shores. Okay, so that's part number one. It's a very, very scary thing, and it's very real, and it's happening right now, even as I make this presentation. The second thing that's going on, okay, because of all this massive money printing, there's a band of nations that got together they call themselves the BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa have said, you know, I don't want to touch these US dollars anymore. They're not worth anything. So they have created their own trade alliances now. And they say, we will trade amongst ourselves using only our currencies, and we will no longer accept the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. All right, here you can see them shaking hands. They made the agreement. And in addition to all of that, they have formed their own bank called the New Development Bank, which usurps the IMF and the World Bank. We've heard of those, okay? Those are all banking institutions that have been basically paying for global growth in US dollars. This new banking alliance basically says, forget it, we're off the US dollar standard, which also reduces demand for US dollars, which then lowers the value even further. Ladies and gentlemen, we got a major problem coming on. Now, there's something else going on. China, for the last decade, has been very quietly, and now recently not so quietly, buying up massive quantities of gold. They've been buying roughly 2,000 tons of gold. A ton is 2,000 pounds. 2,000 pound lots of gold every single year. Why? Because gold is money, and they want to create the next world's reserve currency backed by gold to go back to the place where we were before, where we had a stable money system. Now, this is not just a pipe dream. In fact, in November, just before Christmas, here's Christine Lagarde, the chairman of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, came out and said, congratulations, China. You are now one of the main players. You are a reserve currency. And again, you're not hearing about this on CNBC or CNN, but it's all happening right now, even as we're listening to each other on this webinar. And in fact, here's a billboard. There's two of them. One hangs outside the Beijing airport, the other one outside the Shanghai airport, and China has come right out and said, here we are, the RMB, your new choice, the new world reserve currency. The world is shifting at such a rapid pace, and our mainstream media isn't reporting it, but it doesn't mean it's not happening. All of these things are happening, which are undermining the importance of the US dollar, which means we as North Americans need to start preparing for this. In fact, we should have started preparing before, and if you haven't, now is the time. I'm going to show us what to do about this. Here's the thing. JP Morgan, you know, we've all heard of the JP Morgan Bank. This is a picture of the original JP Morgan, okay? Here's what he said. Now, look at the date on this quote. It's 1912. What year did the Federal Reserve open its doors? 1913. The guy that actually created the Federal Reserve, right here in his own words, he comes out the year before they open his new private bank and say, gold is money. Everything else is credit. What does that word credit mean? It's just another word for debt. I'll pay you tomorrow for the ability to spend today. All right? Gold is money. Everything else is debt. And I showed you how money gets created, right? Every new unit of currency in a fiat system is a new unit of debt. All right? There's something to this. He knew exactly what he was talking about because he created the system that we currently reside in. So gold is money. Okay? Gold is money. Everything else is debt. Listen, most people look at gold as an investment. Gold is not an investment. Gold is money. It's got a 5,000-year track record as money. It's God's money. He created it. You cannot print it. You cannot destroy it. It has a stable store of value. It is precious, and it's finite, which is why it works as money. And if you follow the history of money, we always go to a gold standard, go off it, destroy it, and then come back to a gold standard. That's where we are today. Okay, so gold is money. It's also money insurance because it protects our purchasing power. So the value of gold, the purchasing power of gold actually doesn't really rise or fall. Remember that example I gave you at the beginning here about the suit? It was a suit was an ounce of gold 2,000 years ago. It was an ounce of gold 60 years ago, and it's still an ounce of gold today. So purchasing power of gold really doesn't change. It holds it. So when it is said that the price of gold has gone up, what it really means is that the value of the currency fell. In other words, it takes more currency to buy stuff, and it takes more currency to buy gold. And when it is said that the price of gold fell down, it basically means that the currency rose against it. Okay? Here's a great example. 3 years ago, an ounce of gold was $12.24 US per ounce. The Canadian dollar and the US dollar were equal to each other. We call it being on par. And so I could buy an ounce of gold for $12.24 US or $12.25 Canadian. Call it, it's the same thing, all right? 3 weeks ago, an ounce of gold was $12.26 US. But you know, Canada is a heavily resource-dependent economy. And with global trade down and a recession on, demand for resources is down, demand for Canadian dollars is down, so the value of the Canadian dollar went down. So all of a sudden, even though the price of gold is the same, it's now 1,700 Canadian dollars. Did the price of gold go up or down? Neither. It stayed the same. It was the currency which fluctuated. And the reason why I spend so much time talking about how this inflation, blowing up the currency system, reduces the value. The petrodollar collapse, reduces the dollar. The brand new reserve currency reduces the dollar. The reason why I share this with you is because all of these forces are pushing down the value of the US dollar, and we're about to see our prices go through the roof and gold go spiking right along with it. Okay? It's so important to understand how this works. Now, there's one more thing going on that I want to talk about here, and it's called derivatives. The derivative is when you take one financial product and then you turn it into many new financial products, some of which are worthless. Warren Buffett called derivatives financial weapons of mass destruction. And one of the ways that they do this, now listen, understand one thing. Gold is money, and it remains stable. Fiat currency is fake money, and it fluctuates, usually downward. So when the price of gold goes up, central banks don't like it because it indicates that people are losing faith in the dollar and the value is crashing. So they'll do everything in their power to make the dollar look stronger than it really is. One of the ways that they do that is they try to manipulate the price of gold downward, artificially suppress it. One of the ways they do that is through a derivative called an ETF. Now, just check this out. So there is an instrument called an ETF. It's basically a paper certificate. So if this is a paper certificate, this could be my gold ETF right here. And it says, hey, you own an ounce of gold. It's a piece of paper. But you know, when I started making this presentation a year ago, there were 240 ETFs for every physical ounce of gold in existence, which basically meant for every 240 people that had one of these sheets of paper, only one of them actually had the gold, which basically meant that 239 were going to get nothing and only one was going to get the gold. It's basically fiat gold, okay? The dollar has been falling. The central banks have been flooding the market with these things called ETFs to artificially make the price of gold appear smaller, all right? Today, as of 2 weeks ago, there are now 542 of these ETFs against each physical ounce of gold. And the reason why this system can last is because most people do it on a trade basis. They buy the ETF, they sell the ETF, and they settle out in cash. But what's beginning to happen now, George Soros and many others, and individuals like you and me are beginning to say, I don't want the paper, I don't want the cash, I want the physical gold. Ladies and gentlemen, you want physical gold because if you've got one of these ETFs, for every one of these ETF, for every ounce of gold out there, there's 542 people that think they own it that don't. You need to have your hands on physical gold. And what's going to begin happening now is people start claiming it up. And here you see a picture. The vaults are empty. They've manipulated the market with gold that doesn't exist. And so, you know, when you look at the spot price, people always go to the internet and look at the spot price. The spot price is actually the future contract price based on this physical paper market. The price of physical gold will always be higher than the spot price. You cannot compare them. You need to start acquiring gold, and you need to start doing it now because these supplies are getting increasingly harder to find. Now, the last thing that's going on that I want you to understand, China, like I said before, is backing their currency with gold. And they understand all this playing around that's happening at the commodity exchange with these ETFs. So they've now come out, and they've always had what's called the Shanghai Gold Exchange. It competes with the London Gold Exchange. They've now said, hey, listen, we have allowed you to get away with this long enough, but we from here on in will now begin to establish the price of gold, and we will not price it in ounces in US dollars. We're going to price it in Chinese currency, the yuan, per gram, and we will not accept US dollars for them because the US dollar is becoming more and more worthless. Ladies and gentlemen, now is the time to get your hands on gold, now more than ever, okay? So let me ask you something. Have I made a case for inflation? Yeah, I hope I would say yes. Have I made a case that the petrodollar collapse, the reserve currency system collapsing, the band of nations and China backing its currency are all putting downward pressure on the dollar that must sooner or later manifest itself? I hope you'll answer. Ladies and gentlemen, I really do believe that we will have in the not too distant future a situation right here in Canada, the United States, that looks identical to what's going on in Venezuela right now. And if you don't know what's going on there, just Google it. So let me ask you a question. You probably live in a home or apartment. You got a pretty comfortable life right now. You probably have some form of homeowner's insurance. You probably got some kind of medical insurance. You probably got car insurance. But let me ask you this. Do you have any money insurance? And what are you talking about, Howard? Well, I think you figured out I'm talking about gold, right? So let's look at some more numbers, okay? Since the Great Depression in 1932, under the Federal Reserve banking system, the dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power. While gold, the vehicle that used to back our currency but doesn't anymore, gold has risen in value more than 5,800%. That's a real number, okay? Are you catching this? This is for real. We could look at it like this. If you took $100,000 in 1932, today the purchasing power of that $100,000 in today's terms would only be $2,000. In other words, it takes $100 today to buy what $2 would have bought you back then. If that's not inflation, folks, I don't know what is. We could also look at it like this. If you took that same $100,000 in 1932 and used it to acquire gold and let that gold just sit in the corner, accumulate no interest at all, the value of that gold today would be $5,970,000. Like, that's astronomical. And you can calculate these numbers for yourself. These is for real, okay? Gold is inflation-proof money. And everything we read in here, all the experts basically recommend get your hands on gold. We've all heard it. We all know it. We all sense it. So why don't we? Well, there's a couple problems with it. First of all, it's unaffordable. You know, we've already established that most people are stretched out, financially stretched out. So at $1,200 to $1,300, most of us don't have a spare $1,200 to go get an ounce of gold at a time to create any meaningful savings, so we don't even bother starting. We're intimidated by it. Secondly, it's inaccessible. A lot of people are like, where do I find it? How do I get it? How do I keep it safe? And last but not least, I mean, it's difficult to use in its current form. I mean, here's an ounce of gold here. I can't just go down to the gas station or the grocery store, give them one of these things for a loaf of bread, and then expect to get change in return. The current system just doesn't work this way. Clearly, gold holds its value and its money, but we need to get it into a more usable format. And that's what this is all about. I want to introduce you to this company called Karatbars. So, you know, what they've done, Karatbars is established in 2008 in Stuttgart, Germany by an incredible visionary named Harold Zeitz, who watched his wealthy clients all accumulating massive stores of gold while the everyday citizen wasn't. He set out to create a company that would equalize, democratize the ownership of gold and allow everyday people, put gold in the hands of the masses, millions of people around the world, by producing it in smaller, more affordable, and transactable sizes. So instead of producing gold bars, real gold bars, in ounce size forms, he produces it in 1 gram, 2.5 gram, and 5 gram increments. And now we even have 1/10 of a gram and 2/10 of a gram. So look at it like this. When I think of a 1/10 of a gram, that's like my $5 bill. 2/10 of a gram, that's like my $10 bill. A gram, that's my $50 bill. 2 grams, that's my $100 bill. A 5 gram, that's like my $400 bill. So my $500 bill. We have a complete complement, but we can all afford to get our hands on it. So let me talk about the product just a little bit here. People look at it, so that you see the picture of the Karatbar here. Here's one in my hand. People say, well, what, is that just a gold certificate? Nope. What you see here in the center right here, that is pure 24 karat, 999 pure gold bullion produced in an LBMA accredited refinery. Now, what is that? The LBMA is the London Bullion Market Association, and they're the governing body that oversee not only global gold trade, but also they're the ones that accredit the refineries that produce consistently the purest form of gold that's actually held by the central banks in bullion, brick, or recognized bar format. Okay? So the central banks will only hold gold stamped from a good delivery refinery. So if there's a couple hundred refineries on the planet, there's only a handful on the good delivery list. Every single Karatbar comes out of a London good delivery refinery, meaning it's recognized by anybody in the gold business anywhere on the planet. They're uniquely serial numbered, stamped with the refiner's signature on it. They then take this little piece of gold bar, embed it in a piece of credit card size plastic, laminate it, put security features on it, and that's important because as long as that seal is never broken, it's an assurance to the future buyer that the purity is the same when you sell it as it was when you acquired it, which means you're always going to get your value out of it. You don't have any hassle trying to liquidate it. So there's more going on here, but that's enough for the purpose of this discussion. So at this point, people say, well, what are you selling? Absolutely nothing. All we're doing here, Karatbars has created a system where any person on the planet in over 123 countries around the world can go and open for themselves a free gold savings account. Yep, you heard me say it, a free gold savings account. Just like you go down to the bank and you open up a savings account, doesn't really cost you anything. You open the account and then you can put money into it. Here, you can do the same thing. You open up a free account and you put money into it, but when you put money into it, you start saving in gold. And as you're saving this gold, Karatbar says, do you want us to ship it to you, or would you like us to hold it in the vault for you so you can take physical delivery of it? And so this is just a gold savings program, because gold holds its value. It's inflation proof. And so we take, let's say a gram of gold is $60. We take $60 a week, throw it into that account. Some people say, listen, I got $50,000. What do I do with it? Take your $50,000 and put it into gold now before the value of the currency goes down any further. Some people say, well, listen, I can only do $50 a week. Then put $50 a week into your account. In frequencies and in amounts, it's all self-directed, just like any other savings account. You put what you can, when you can, into that account and inflation-proof yourself. And you save, and you save, and you save. And then when you're ready to tap into your savings, you simply exchange the gold back into whatever currency we're using at the time that you need it, having fully inflation-proofed yourself the ravages of inflation. That's what this is all about, okay? Now, I want to talk about this for a second. I want to talk about the value of grams. I want to take you back to 1971. 71, Nixon takes us off the gold standard. Now, so let's go back to July. In 1971, if you had 1 gram of gold, it would buy you 5 loaves of bread. If you had $1, it would buy you 4 loaves of bread. It actually makes sense because it takes 31 grams to make an ounce, and the US dollar peg was it takes $32 to get an ounce. So you've got this ratio, and for decades, it would have been exactly the same. 1 gram, 5 loaves, $1, 4 loaves, and that ratio didn't change for years. In 1971, we went off the gold standard. All of a sudden, inflation started hitting. They started increasing the money. What's it look like today? Today, the very same gram of gold will now get you 20 loaves of bread. The very same dollar now all of a sudden doesn't even get you a loaf. It gets you a couple of slices if you're lucky. What held its value? Well, I would actually say that gold more than held its value. It gets you more today than it did then because the inflation has destroyed the money. Now, here's what I want you to understand. We spend a lot of time helping people understand the nature of inflation and then understanding the reason why gold is so important because it holds its value, okay? Here's the problem. If you only acquire ounces, now I'm talking to you somebody that actually has a long history with gold. I would start acquiring gold long before I ever heard of Karatbars. So I know about ounces and kilos, and I visited mine sites. I've invested in several mining operations, so I know a lot about this market. Now here's the thing. I first started acquiring only ounces. Now here's the problem. If you have an ounce of gold and it is holding your value, so today it's 1,200, tomorrow it's 1,300, next year it's 2,000, whatever the number is. Okay, as the dollars are lowering, the gold is increasing because it's holding its purchasing power. If I've only got an ounce of gold and I need to turn it back into cash, I can't just cut this thing into 16 pieces and give them just 1/16 or 1/4 or 1/8. I need to give them the entire amount. So let's make it nice and simple. Let's suppose we're in a period of hyperinflation. And by the way, as all these dollars come flooding back on shore, we are going to have hyperinflation. And that's when prices begin rapidly escalating because the value begins massively crashing. We will see this. Mark my words. It's not that I want to be right about this. I fear that I'm right about this. If you only have an ounce, so let's say I convert this into $1,200 and I need to go get some groceries and I need some milk and some bread and some eggs. So these are all perishable items. So I can't go buy $1,200 worth because by the time I consume, they've already gone bad. So I only need, a basket of this stuff. All right, so let's just say that I convert this into $1,200. I go and spend $2 on groceries. That puts $1,000 worth of unspent currency in my pocket, but we're in a period of hyperinflation, which basically means the price has doubled again a couple days from now. All right, so the $1,000 in my pocket today is only worth $500 a couple days from now. It's only worth $250 a couple days after that. It's only worth $125 a couple of days after that. All right, inflation is eating it. The beautiful thing about these little grams, as the value of the currency drops, as the prices go up, the value of the gold also goes up. So this gram will get me 20 loaves of bread today. It'll get me 20 loaves of bread tomorrow. Now you don't need 20 loaves, but it'll get me a basket of groceries today. It got me a basket of groceries 10 years from now, and it gets me a basket of groceries 10 years from now. The beautiful thing is, once I understood this, I said, I don't want to get ounces. I want to get my hands on as many of these grams as I can because now I can spend them as I need them and not have to convert large quantities and put currency in my pocket that is going down the very second I put my hands on it. This is small, inflation-proof, spendable units. And I can't stress this strongly enough. You want to get your hands on as many grams as you humanly can. Get as much as you can, as often as you can. Now, here's what Alan Greenspan said. We know who he is, right? Former chair of the Federal Reserve. He's the one that started all the bail-ins, all the QE programs. Here's what he said. He who owns gold owns money. We heard it from the first central banker, J.P. Morgan. We're hearing it from the next central banker, Alan Greenspan. He who owns gold owns money. Now, catch this. In the absence of gold, there is no way to protect your savings from confiscation through inflation. Confiscation through inflation, think about it. If you put $1,000 in the bank today and you just leave it there for 5 years and you pull it out 5 years from now, will the $1,000 buy you more or buy you less 5 years from now than it does today? And I think we'd all answer it's going to buy less. That's what it means to have your money confiscated through inflation. Gold protects you from that because the value of it doesn't go down. So we're in the gold savings business, and I just want to take you through this very quickly, okay? What if you saved, we all believe that saving money is an important thing to do, but as we save, inflation is stealing it. But what if we put $300 a month into a savings account? We did it for 20 years. At the end of 20 years, you would have saved $72,000. $300 a month, by the way, is about $60 a week, $65 a week. It's about $1 a week, okay? But $300 a month goes into a savings account. At the end of 20 years, $72,000 went in. Unfortunately, because of inflation, that $72,000 in today's terms only buys you $56,000 worth. In other words, you've lost $16,000 worth of purchasing power over the course of 20 years. What if you still moved $300 a month into an account, into a savings account, but you moved it into a gold-based account? Well, over 20 years, you still put $72,000 aside. However, it's now set aside in gold, and the value of that gold accumulated over time today is worth $236,000, a net increase of $164,000. Now, when you think about this and you understand the nature of inflation now, can you see the implications of saving in gold toward your retirement or your kids' education or just buying your groceries 5 years from now? I certainly could. And I know what I've decided to do. So let me ask you this. How would you rather save? In this toilet paper money or in a real store of value that will not devalue to zero over time? Well, I'm just going to let you come to your own conclusion, and I hope you're coming to the right one. All right? So that's really what this is all